Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Mike Suleiman with South Jersey Forward, nonpartisan think tank and advocacy organization. Really excited to join you tonight, talk about Wharton State Forest and protecting and preserving Wharton State Forest for future generations. Very excited to have a couple good guys joining us. First off is the president of Open Trails New Jersey, John Druding, is with us, and you'll hear from him in a little bit. We also have Ron Wiggins from the New Jersey State Federation of Sportsmen Clubs representing Camden County. So we have two good guys that are going to talk about this issue, talk about Wharton State Forest, the history of it, some recent articles you've seen about closing part of the roads in Wharton State Forest and why that has been a net detriment to a lot of folks, hundreds of thousands of people each year who visit and frequent and enjoy I always say, a gem in southern New Jersey, covers three counties. The fact that we have this a few minutes from all of us, wherever you live in South Jersey, is really remarkable. And it's something we as New Jerseyans should all be proud of. So we look forward to a spirited conversation here. Again, you can follow us, southjerseyforward.org. We're streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat of whatever service you're using to watch us on, and we'd be happy to present your questions to our virtual roundtable here. So I really want to get started. I'll just say from the get-go, when we were joking before we got on with John and Ron, that, look, I'm an environmentalist. We support responsible use of forests and forestry. Any bad actors, we got to take care of them and penalize them. I believe in climate change, so my environmental creds, I think, are I support offshore wind, even though that's unpopular. So I think my environmental creds are on point. However, I think we were talking, and we'll talk first about the history, but this idea of the closures of the roads that are being looked at by the state. It's really a situation of using a machete instead of a scalpel, where and this is why people get frustrated with government, right? It's an instance where there are some issues we need to deal with, but taking a chopping block to everything is way too much of an overreach. So we're going to talk about that. But first, John, let me start with you. Obviously, maybe tell us a little bit about your group, Open Trails New Jersey, and what kind of started this entity, because you were very passionate about Wharton State Forest and the Pinelands, and why is it that hundreds of thousands of people every year visit this gem we have here in southern New Jersey?
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for having me here on the your podcast. So Open Trails New Jersey was formed back in 2015 when roads in Wharton State Forest were suddenly closed down without warning. Before that time, none of our group really knew each other. We were off enjoying our various recreations within the forest, and we come to find out that a large number of roads in Wharton were closed back in 2015, and at that time there was not a lot of knowledge about what was going on. There wasn't any communication, in advance, and so our group kind of found each other, right, as we learned about the road closures, and were wondering what was the cause of them, and how to potentially change those closures. And so we formed a group basically to push back against the road closures. At the time, as I mentioned, there was no communication with the public when this occurred, and as a result, the state wound up backing off on those road closures, apologizing for them, and reopening them. And after that occurred, our group tried to stay, engaged with the with the state on various ways that we might be able to help with some of the reasons that they wanted to close roads in the first place, right? So working on volunteer projects for cleaning up the forests, working on protection projects. Believe it or not, you had said that that you're an environmentalist, Mike. I mean, I would consider myself an environmentalist as well. I spent my whole life in the Pine Barrens in one way or the other. I'm an Eagle Scout. I grew up camping and hiking, kayaking in the forest, and so I want to see it protected too. And ultimately, that's what our group wants to do. We want to see it protected for future generations, but we also want to see it open and accessible, right? And that's I think the key difference I think with us and maybe some of the other groups out there is that we want the forest to be accessible to folks who want to use it for their recreation.
Yeah, and Ron, talk to us about kind of your role. Certainly, with there's every county, most counties have sportsman clubs. Certainly, you have a vibrant chapter there in Camden County. But kind of what draws you to, obviously, none of us getting paid for this. For your free time to really be so passionate about the forest and the work that your organization does.
Well, thanks, Mike. Yeah, I joined and volunteered with the NJSFSC to help foster, protect, and keep the tradition of like hunting alive. I'm a hunter. I'm an outdoorsman. Also stewardship of the land as well. And there, I'm very, I guess, strongly support conservation efforts. And I think where the line got so blurred and really crossed over on this topic is we went straight from conservation to preservation. I think that from speaking to fellow hunters, sportsmen, all kinds of different recreational groups that I've had the pleasure of interacting with. We all sort of want the same thing. We want to preserve Wharton State Forest for future generations and for ourselves to enjoy, because it's a very special place. But the actions that by all the road closures and restricting access isn't the answer in protecting. It's a gross overreach. And so that's why I sort of joined up, and when I met John with Open Trails as well, to carry that voice. Because I really feel very passionate and strongly about it. And I think we sort of all had the same end goal. It's really just a philosophy on how we get there.
Agreed, and I think it's good that we kind of set that as a stage, because again, I just think given how tribalistic politics has become, given how black and white our society's become, it's either total don't touch it, or let's just burn everything down and ruin the forest. And clearly the two extremes, it's not where most folks are, right? So I think we set the stage of, we all support conservation, we all support a pristine environment, and we all like seeing bad actors pay for bad deeds. So having said that, now we can move on to have an intelligent and thoughtful conversation. So John, let's go back to, it's funny, peek behind the curtain. You and I didn't know each other about a year ago. A mutual friend of ours connected us and said, Solomon, he said, hey, talk to this guy Druding. I think it's a very important issue you should even look at. I said, I don't really know much. I'm not a hunter. I'm not a hiker, frankly. But I've certainly spent my time in the Pinelands and Wharton. You should talk to Druding. I said, all right, let me talk to this guy, John Druding. And then, learned about this issue and really opened my eyes. But, when did this idea first start of closing any of the roads in Wharton State Forest? And, kind of what prompted this? Was it bad actors? Was the off-road folks? How did we, I think it was in 2015, how did we get to this point where we are now?
Yeah, great question. And I think, to your point earlier, this whole discussion is going to be filled with nuance, right? I mean, you hit the nail on the head, right? This is definitely not a black and white issue, a left and right issue, a partisan issue. It is a nuanced issue, right? And here as the president of Open Trails, right, who was probably at the front of wanting to keep the roads, open to the greatest extent possible. I'm here to acknowledge that there are issues in the state forest, right? I mean, it's not perfect. There are absolutely bad actors out there who are potentially damaging habitat and wildlife. There's a problem with dumpers out in the state forest, and so there are legitimate issues that need to be addressed, right? And I do think the people who are pushing for the closures are thinking of those things when they're wanting to close the roads, right? They're wanting to resolve those issues. And I'll say right here, I don't disagree that there are those issues out there. I just fundamentally disagree on the way that we should go about, tackling those issues. So I think that's probably the main, motivation behind the reason for the closures is that the prevention of habitat impact or damage to the forest. I just think that it's wrongheaded.
All right, so Ron, so take me from there. So we have a situation in Wharton. You've got off-road folks maybe going off trail, damaging the wildlife, illegal dumping there, whatever it is. People not doing what you and John do, which is maintain the forest, treat it with respect, clean up after yourselves. People are doing bad. Then we get to a point where I assume then there's an outcry by folks and the DEP gets in. So why don't you take it from there? Where do we get from, okay, we've got some issues. Now we've got some intervention by the state.
Well, so interesting, and this actually goes back to 2011. It's actually documentation. I think what initially really spurred this on was exactly what you said. You had bad actors that were trailblazing, all right? They were making their own trails. So that is something that you want to avoid and prevent. You don't want to see that happen. But you don't close down all the established roads based off of bad actors trailblazing. So it comes down to enforcement, and it comes down to education. It's been acknowledged on several levels in several stages during this topic in regards to, I have documentation from the DEP for several instances over the years within this 14-year period, acknowledging the need for enforcement. And yet it sort of never took any kind of traction, so to speak, right? There's never any traction. In fact, the only time you really saw like a concerted effort for enforcement was after they unveiled that they were going to enforce the map again. So it just so happened then, right, within within a week or two of that announcement, then they had a crackdown. And it's like, so the optics of it really seemed to show that, that they sort of didn't want to enforce it until they were able to close access to all the roads. That's certainly how it would appear. I hate to jump to conclusions, but there's been several documented instances where greater enforcement was needed, and then also education. We with Open Trails, we partner and advocate for Tread Lightly. Tread Lightly is an organization that's nationally recognized that educate users on the proper, operation and rate of their vehicles, right? So you're not tearing everything up. That's everything is right in the defined within the word tread lightly. And unfortunately, we have been unable to really partner up with the DEP and have a responsible approach to curb the bad actors and advocate and educate those that, you also have folks out there that I'm sure that don't have the knowledge, right, or the background, right? So that's where education is also very important.
Yeah, I will say, just my personal opinion, this is certainly not meant to dunk on the DEP. Certainly I respect everybody in state government who work hard, and, it's just a policy disagreement that folks have. It's nothing personal. It's just, clearly this, could be viewed as an overreach or an overreaction. I don't want to say overreach, an overreaction. So we have this situation, just for the laypersons, and I consider myself a layperson, certainly. So we have a situation, they're bad actors. Eventually, it gets to the state level, and I'm sure county folks as well. Okay, we've got issues in Wharton State Forest. How do we deal with this? And I think people realize it's not like that there's, police all over the place patrolling, how many acres of forestry. So not the easiest thing to patrol, admittedly. Now, we will talk about that a little later where we could have more enforcement, but clearly there's a problem. State and elected officials, okay, we've got to deal with this problem. And John, talk us about what we hear about the 2015 map. So we have about 300 miles of roadway in Warren, or is it 600? It's three.
Yeah, so it depends on how you who you ask, right? Back in 2014, I think the DEP submitted a grant application to the federal government asking for federal funds to start a road maintenance program in Wharton. And at that time, they claimed there were 600 miles plus, I think, actually, miles of roads within Wharton. And, fast forward to today, the latest map has that number down to about 175. I think the 2015 map if I recall correctly, was somewhere in the neighborhood of 200, 220, something
So
like that.
I'm sorry.
Um,
So let's level round up.
yeah, yeah,
Let's say we go with the 600 figure. So 2015, and this is many years ago, different, gubernatorial administration. DEP says, okay, let's look at the roads. And people don't realize how at one time it was populated. I mean, it goes back to the Revolutionary War days, right? The history of Wharton State Forest and the villages that there were and industry and things of that nature. So let's say we have 600 miles of road. The DEP in 2015 says, okay, let's see what we can do to close some of these roads. And essentially, John, they cut the roads in half, right? That was the proposal in 2015.
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, less than half, right? I mean, if we want to be generous to the DEP, we could say half. But yeah,
And feel
less
free
than
to
half,
jump in too,
basically.
Ron. So then that was proposed in 2015. Talk to me about what happened around that time where that ended up not happening. Was it public outreach? Was it outcry by members around the organization? Talk me through kind of what happened and how that got squashed, so to speak.
Yes.
Yeah.
There
It's good,
were
Ron.
several out meetings that had occurred with because it really was like it poked the beehive. All right, like so the mass majority of users and folks that love Wharton State Forest came out in masses in protest, and that's why it was overturned and then restored back. The regards to even like the enforcement part and so forth, I want to touch base real quick and just sort of circle
Yeah.
back. All right, so if you think about it's cutting down the access down to a third, right? Because basically it's a third of the roads that they want to close, but there hasn't been any kind of justification, right, on closing that many roads. So I've done my research on this topic. I don't go into things lightly in regards to I don't want to make any kind of false claims or anything of that nature. So I had research and opened citations and violations for a whole calendar year, and you simply just didn't have so whether it was just the fact that it wasn't patrolled whatsoever, or there just wasn't the frequency of abuse that would support closing this mileage of roads. So it's really been, I think we have documentation to support the machete versus the scalpel aspect and approach to this topic.
Yeah, and feel free to jump in, John. Yeah.
And Mike, if I
Please.
could just go back and just touch on some of
Yeah.
the pushback, because there's a couple of points I wanted to make here. So back in 2015 and even now in 2024, the pushback on this is large and diverse, right? It's not as the DEP might try to portray us to be a bunch of marauding off-roaders, right, who are pushing back on these road closures. It's people from basically every walk of life and every recreational activity, and it's also at multiple levels of government and the community, right? So back in 2015 and now in 2024. The municipalities were involved, right? There were meetings at all the local municipalities, in their town council meetings, talking about this topic. And back in 2015 and again in 2024, those municipalities have been actually passing resolutions against these road closures, because that's what their constituents in their towns wanted them to do. So my point is that there was broad-based opposition against the road closures, and it wasn't coming from a very narrow segment or a few loud people, as some people might claim it to be. It definitely is widespread and broad, and I go back to the scene in Hamilton High School, I believe it was back in 2015, right, where they had a public meeting, for this. That was without any organization really before, OTNJ was fully organized, and hundreds of people, came to that meeting, to protest the road closure. So like I said, it is a very widespread issue across multiple user types within the
We have a
within the
couple
forest.
comments, and I appreciate folks watching either on Facebook or on YouTube submitting comments. We'll get to those in a second. Love to ask our panel some questions. But so going back, so 2015, there's a push by the DEP. It's stopped. And I think it's important to note, and we haven't talked about this, but I'll assume it's the case. There is no, you guys aren't opposed to no closures. It's just the amount and the scope of the closures. If it makes sense, it sounds like you guys would be okay with closing certain roads. It's just the overreach. It seems like it's a little overboard. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, so I mean, so we've said before there's topographical maps, right, that document, what are the legitimate roads within Wharton State Forest. We are totally fine with anything that's not on the topographical map is not a road, right? That's fine. We're not advocating that people should be able to drive any vehicle anywhere, anytime. Our main message is that we want people to be able to use established roads in the
So let's fast forward then, Ron. So 2015, there's a proposed map, doesn't get enacted. I don't know if the issue dies down or what have you. Then the last couple of years, it's come back into effect. Where I remember a year ago, a mutual friend of ours connected John and I, and then just recently, the DEP announced that this would be the final map or whatever you want to call it. It goes into effect, I think, this month. Right? It's already in effect, essentially. So what happened kind of the last year or two that really prompted this issue again? Was it more outcry by proponents of closures? Were there instances that precipitated this in terms of bad actors? Kind of what happened between 2015 now that this is an issue again?
Well, the plan essentially stayed the same. What had occurred was that the based off of the opposition and how it evolved and went down in 2015, the objective and goal was still there. So they just changed strategies in regards to crossing the T's and dotting the I's. And so, because one of the main failures was not contacting all stakeholder groups. All right, so with this current situation now, they conducted a survey, an online survey, and so they reached out to, like, DEP reached out to all of the user groups, stakeholders, for their to seek their input. And that's what has been, I guess, increasingly frustrating this go round. All right, is that the data, the response clearly showed overwhelmingly majority were opposed to the road closures, and yet it was yet the initial plan was almost like identical, right? The tweaks on it are very minimal. And in fact, they actually even closed more road mileage, more miles of road this go round. So, so the plan hadn't changed. All right. So there wasn't increased abuse. It was the initial, I guess, objective to start with. And it was just conducted in a different manner. And, and there was also sort of, helped, all right, by not having in-person meetings, right? So coming off of the pandemic and so forth, it was much easier to sort of stay veiled and behind the curtain, so to speak, right? So you didn't really get a chance to actually have public input in an effective manner to truly reflect what the users and lovers of Wharton State Forest want.
So David, go ahead.
I want to footstep that point that Ron made about the about the feedback, right, from the users. When this came back in, I guess it was 2021, 2022, the DEP came out and said, hey, we want to engage the public in this process, right? We want to have stakeholder feedback. We want to do surveys. We want to make it a data-driven approach. And as a data guy myself, I thought, hey, that's great. I mean, that's what we've been asking for, actually, right? We've been asking for an engagement with the public to find out what the public wants and come to some sort of compromise, position. And Ron hit the nail on the head, right? After all the feedback, 1,600 surveys, by a 3-to-1 margin, people saying they want access, the same 1,000 mentions in the survey about day-to-day road use. 11 municipal resolutions in 11 different towns within South Jersey saying we don't want the roads closed. The DEP restricted the roads more than the failed 2015 map that was withdrawn in disgrace. So to me, after working so hard on trying to come to a compromise with them on this, for them to do that, it's like a kick in the teeth.
A couple comments before we kind of really dive into kind of I say the devil's advocate argument that some folks have made. David Dempsey, your founder of Open Trails, had technical difficulties, could not come on, but wanted to comment that the vast majority of the areas that were documented as damaged in the forest are now healed. Pictures of damage are not recent; they date back to 2015. So, if that is the case, that's very good news. At least that the areas have been rehabilitated, which I think we all support. Again, we're all environmentalists and conservationists. I think that's a good thing. Joe Morrison asks on YouTube, "How can DEP close roads they don't own?" That is a good question. Actually, anybody want to take that?
Yeah, so I'll start, Ron, and you can definitely chime in as well. This is a valid question. Right. I think one of the key aspects of this, and you touched on it a little earlier in the discussion, Mike, is that there's a lot of history in Wharton State Forest. Right. A lot of people don't necessarily realize that there was a ton of industry within Wharton State Forest. Right. There were multiple, iron towns within Wharton State Forest and industry and cranberry, bogs and all kinds of operations within Wharton State Forest. And those things were interconnected by a road network, right? And that road network that was started during the Revolution, literally, and actually even before that, some of them are Native American trails, have existed continuously, from that time period, right? And so these roads that we're talking about, a lot of them are named, right? They show up in the records for municipalities, and they have road returns, with the county, and they really can't just be closed, right, without being vacated, and I think that's really going to be one of the questions that's going to have to be tested here. Is does the DEP actually have the authority to close these roads if they possibly don't own them, if they're owned by instead the municipalities or the county? So it's a very valid question, Joe.
That's good. Appreciate that explainer. So just folks would argue, and I've heard this argument too, especially on NJ Spotlight and others, that look, whether you're a hiker, a biker, a hunter, a scenic driver, what have you, you still got a third or 40% of these roads still open. You're still experiencing the wonders. I don't mean that facetiously. The wonders and the awe of this beautiful forestry. How is this negatively impacting you? You're not going to see as much of the forest as you would like, but you're still going to be able to enjoy it and enjoy it responsibly, and hopefully cut down on damage to the forest. So, what do you say to folks that say that, look, this is not as big a deal as Druding and Open Trails and Ron and the sportsmen are saying that it's going to be?
I'd sort of challenge, what damage is being done on the roads that's being closed. Like, they're actually established roads. All right. So, we have had volunteer effort, offers for volunteers as well for trail maintenance. All right. To assist. What exactly are we protecting if we're closing the roads? Ultimately the issue at hand is to prevent any kind of trailblazing where folks are getting off of established road. Within this network of roads, I guess I have a hard time understanding how any damage is being done when you're just traversing a road that's already there and it's been there. So I can sort of just share that, I've been a visitor of Wharton State Forest since I was a kid. Been over 40 years. Going to give you some age away here, right? So, if anything, I think that the concerted efforts that have already been made, because there was certainly, you certainly ran into, I guess, sort of an off-road vehicle boom, so to speak, back in the 90s. You had all the jacked up big trucks and so forth, and they were, tearing up like wetlands and vernal ponds and so forth. All right, so that was where a lot of this also would have stemmed from. All right, but the efforts in education those have largely gone away. And if there's any of that activity that's going on, well, then that's where you focus and you enforce and you correct the situation. I have a hard time understanding how what you're protecting. Right, you're protecting a road that's just going to get overgrown, and it's going to impede any kind of access for emergency personnel and so forth. It just doesn't. It flies in the face of common sense.
Yeah, and just please jump in, John.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'll give you a different perspective to your question, to answer the question of, hey, why do you need all these roads? Right? Isn't what you have on the new map enough? And a slightly different perspective than the tack that Ron took is to look at it from the perspective of it's hard to comprehend how large Wharton State Forest is. Right? It's 125,000 acres, right? When you zoom out on Google Maps and look at, New Jersey, for instance, it's the biggest green spot, right, on the entire state. It's absolutely, mammoth, right? And an analogy I would use to kind of describe why do we need these roads is like looking at maybe a tree, right, where somebody could say, "Hey, why does a tree need all these branches for the leaves when it's got the trunk?" Right. Well, hopefully, when you look at a tree, that the answer is obvious, right? The tiniest branches of the tree, deliver the nutrients and the water to the leaves at the farthest extent of that tree, right? It's likewise with the roads, right? So yeah, the main roads, within Wharton certainly help people start to get towards their destination, but in a lot of cases, it doesn't get you close enough, right? And so, when it comes right down to it, whatever your recreation is, whether it's kayaking or hiking or camping or whatever, first and foremost, you're a motorized user of Wharton because you're getting to that recreation, via a vehicle, right? And another challenge I've heard is oh well, nothing is more than a mile from any road, right? Those of us who are kayakers, right? I'm one myself. I know lots of people are. Do you ever try carrying a kayak, 50-pound kayak or more, a mile? Very, very difficult,
No.
right? If you're a hunter, and you've just taken down, you're a buck, is it hard to drag that buck a mile? You bet, right? So there really is a hardship with the limitation of the roads in terms of being able to experience the recreation that you wanted within Wharton State Forest.
Yeah, and I think Ryan made a good point in one of our chats, and actually Ron had mentioned it before we got on here. This idea of disabled folks or physically challenged folks from enjoying parts of the forest where maybe not carrying a kayak a mile, but and I don't even know if it could be a potential ADA issue. Where if someone who isn't as able-bodied as others, that are they disproportionately impacted by parts of the forest that they now can no longer enjoy. I mean, I know, Ron, you brought that up before we got on, but Ryan in the chat made a good point about that too.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's, speaking from a hunting perspective, as well, so to use a specific user group, it has a high impact, right? High impact on, it's a lot of the terrain within the Pine Barrens as well. All right, is strenuous. All right, to get through. It's dense, full of briars, things of that nature, and it may not seem a mile, it may not seem like a lot, but it is in those conditions, and it can test even those that are the most physically stout.
So the closures are currently in effect now, correct? Like it already went. Was it January 1, I believe, or somewhere about?
November.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, and forgive my ignorance. How are they physically blocking? They just have a barrier, or what's the actual blocking to prevent folks from getting on the roads?
So for the most part, they're not right now. Just for completeness sake, I think it was November 24th. I think is when the DEP said, "Hey, this is our new map. It's in effect." And then the January 1st date is where they said that they were going to start enforcing the new map. Sometime between November and January, some of the those brown carcinite whips that you might have seen have started popping up at the ends of certain roads, closing them off. But otherwise, as of now, there isn't a lot of signage or physical closing of the roads, right? Which brings another question I'm sure we're going to get into, which is how is this going to help, right? Closing the roads and not being able to tell what roads are open and closed.
Well, and I think one of the things, and I'm a big believer, at least we are at South Jersey Ford, is and it's like a negotiation, right? You can't beat something with nothing, as a mentor of mine used to say. And you can't just oppose something. You've got to prove an alternative. So, if not this, then what? And it's kind of this idea of, okay, if there are bad actors and there are issues, how do we counteract that? And is it self-policing? Is it more, officer, whatever the issue is? I know you, John, your Open Trails had a few ideas. What ideas do you have when somebody says, okay, well, what's your idea? Clearly the status quo is not working. If we've got some bad actors, what do we do? And what do you guys say to that?
Yeah, so we've got lots of ideas, right? We've been giving ideas on this topic since we started, right? One of the things I think we need is increased enforcement, right? There are very few officers on duty in such a massive state forest, and they're not going to be effective at that level of staffing to be able to enforce some of these closures and issues. So, I think the park police are fantastic, but we got to give them the resources they need to enforce the laws that already exist. We also touched on this a little bit earlier, protection projects, right? I am perfectly okay with blocking off, areas that need protection, right? And OT&J has been involved in several of these projects, and we have pictures now over the course of multiple years that show how these areas have recovered. Jemima Mount is a great example, right, where that was off limits for driving to begin with. We put protection, around that, and that has recovered tremendously. There are now, 3 or 4 foot tall trees, or even taller, in the middle of what were ruts and roads, in the past. So those things work. And Ron touched on this quite a bit. I think education is important, right? Making sure people know, right, where they can be and can't be, and this is something I think we agree with the DEP on, right? People should know where they should be and shouldn't be. One of the other things that I think we could go further than maybe what the DEP is talking about this today is, as much as we like to think we're unique, in New Jersey and nobody's like us, right? There's 49 other states, right, that some of which have dealt with this exact problem extensively, right? And we can learn from those states and how they, educate, people about roads. We can take things like difficulty, marking on roads to say like, hey, this road you can drive your Prius down this road. It's a green circle, if you will, right? But if you're going to go down this road, you need at least 4-wheel drive, right, to be able to safely traverse that, right? And that will go a long way to try to counteract some of the concerns about safety, right? That people are bringing up, like, hey, people get themselves in trouble out there because they just don't know, right? So that's a huge part of it, I think, is what, as well as the education and communication part.
Yeah, I know. And Ron, there's a discussion in the chat. I appreciate the robust chat that we're having across our social media channels about, while some closures may be unavoidable, and I'm trying to find it. Ben was talking about it. It's just some of these dirt roads rapidly deteriorating, and just it necessitates closures. And explain to us as a layperson, your chapter of the sportsman clubs, one in Atlantic County or Burlington County, the amount of education, but also communication, either to park police or whomever, where if you or your members see something or there's an issue, how has it been? Do you communicate with park police, say, hey, we've noticed this, what have you? Or do you have, and I'm not trying to be funny, you have a group text chain or email like, hey, here's some issues here. Like, it just seems that it depends upon a lot of the enthusiasts and a lot of your members and John's members as well, kind of communicating with each other so that everybody's kept informed, which frankly, park police may not have the bandwidth to do. Other agencies may not have bandwidth to do. It's really relying on the good actors in the forest to kind of patrol itself, right?
Oh, absolutely. We've had several instances where we just started to make a little headway as far as Open Trails New Jersey in partnering with forestry and like the DEP in regards to helping with trail cleanups. And so forth. And unfortunately, it took us several years, right, to even sort of get our foot in the door for that. Those volunteer efforts and requests were largely ignored for many years. It takes a village, right, to be in this together as well. So I totally agree with you, Mike, in regards to the user groups working together and tackling the challenges and any issues and working collectively as opposed to just restricting the whole forest.
Yeah, and I think, we want to talk. I know Mr. Angelosi had a comment in the chat of kind of what elected officials can do and certainly what folks can do who are passionate about this. But I think the one thing, John, going back to you, is they would say, okay, well, let's say essentially we need more park police. Well, that costs money. Who's paying for it? And I'm not saying we have to have an answer for that tonight, but clearly that is something that now is it increased penalties and that those funds are used to pay for more park police. I don't know, but clearly a cost. I think an argument could be made. I'm not making the argument. The other side can make the argument. It is cheaper to close these roads versus hire more park police. What do you say to that?
Yeah, you could jump in. Say that, right? I mean, okay. it is definitely cheaper to close the roads and hire more park police. But I guess when you want to ask the question of what are you trying to accomplish, right? And if you're trying to accomplish protecting the forest, and you're not going to have that police presence, what difference is closing the roads going to make, right? Because I think that one of the problems that you have here, right, is the people who are the law-abiding citizens, like the vast majority of the people out there, they're gonna respect the road closures, right? The people who are off-roading and where they're not supposed to be, they're not going to pay attention to a map anyway, right? So I guess I would say like, hey, do you want this to be effective or window dressing, right? And so, it would require dollars to be able to staff more park police. But closing roads is not some sort of magical substitute, right, for those dollars or those park police.
If I could jump in real quick too,
in
regards to physically, like the financing and so forth, the cost of it, right, for this, I guess we could use some transparency, right, within our state government, because we actually have recreational trail funding, all right, that is derived from the purchase of any kind of off-road vehicle, right? So like a UTV, ATV, enduro bike, what have you. There's proceeds from the sale, and there's also proceeds from the gasoline tax as well. That is dedicated for what they call a recreational trail fund. I know for me, I would love to have some transparency to see where that funding goes, because I haven't been able to break that riddle.
Well, that's you gave me a homework assignment, so I'll have to do our digging. I think somebody had mentioned earlier and I guess they mean the same thing, RTP, the motorized portion of RTP that is funded by off-road vehicle fuel tax, give back to the state some 18 ORV trails. So now, whether that money's being diverted to the general fund or another facet of DEP, I don't know. And I'm not trying to be, and I don't want to talk out of school, because maybe that is being earmarked for something else. I always say we got to call balls and strikes. So that is something that we have to look at and just see, where that is and how much money that brings in, because maybe some of those funds could be used for additional park police. I don't know. It's easy to say things. Just how do you pay for it? I think that's
sure. Yeah. And what John made reference to as well, it's like, you can just look at neighboring states, all right, and so forth. They've adopted plans to where they actually generate funding. It's actually been an economic boom for Pennsylvania, for West Virginia, and so forth. So they've actually taken a different approach rather than close things off. They've expanded it, which also then has reduced the bad actors, because you certainly have an aspect here as well that's sort of like the elephant in the room. But there are certain modes of recreation in New Jersey that are completely outlawed. There is no legal outlet for it. There's no legal outlet for it. So if you have a UTV, an ATV, or what have you, there's no place publicly that you can ride on any public land that is legal in the state of New Jersey. So what that creates is a cowboy, Wild West type of situation, right? Where if I'm already going to be breaking the law, why should I care what they're going to do? All right. In regards. So, and you also run into the liability, right? So the enforcement out there, for in all fairness, for the park enforcement, they are trained not to pursue, right, for liability reasons, right? Last thing you want is to have a park police, chase a 16-year-old on quad and end up with a major injury or fatality. So that's another piece that goes largely unspoken about here. But like other states around us, one thing I have learned with the Federation, Sportsman Federation, is that when it comes to hunting, fishing, and those type of activities, we heavily monitor what other states are doing and what is successful and what is not so successful. There are clear success stories right in our neighboring states that could help address many of the issues that we're experiencing right now in Wharton State Forest.
Well, and just briefly, what are some of the things that other states are doing that you think might be helpful? Just to rapid fire.
They've actually made some dedicated trails for that usage and time frames as well. So so you're not impacting maybe breeding seasons or hunting seasons and so forth. All right. So they are very carefully crafted, right, to where they can sort of balance out, because everything's a balance as well, right? You have a lot of different mouths to feed here, right, in regards to all the different recreation activities that you have. So there is a balance to it. So it's not easy. All right, but we have states that have tackled that. At first, they were a little hesitant. They did some pilots. We don't have to go head first into deep end either. There are pilots that had been performed in Pennsylvania, and they were so successful that they ended up expanding it over years. Because I also am a resident, a part-time resident in Pennsylvania as well. So I love the outdoors. All right. So I'm up in north central PA in the mountains, and then of course the Pine Barrens here in Jersey. And the approach within these two regions are so drastically different. All right. But I see success on one side, and I see, us having to have a podcast here to discuss, the injustices that are happening right now in New Jersey.
Well, that's what we do, baby. South Jersey 4. We talk about public policy and how to fix it and how to solve it. But, John, so let's talk about, I know, and I actually helped. I live in Galloway Township. I know Galloway passed a resolution opposing the maps, and I commend them for doing that. But I know you've had conversations. This is not a partisan issue. You've had conversations with both Democrats and Republicans on this. Is there anything that can be done at the state legislative end that would be helpful? I know Anthony had asked about that in the chat. Is there anything that state lawmakers or county and local lawmakers can do? Talk about a little bit about kind of what your current advocacy efforts have been with Open Trails.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm definitely not one for bigger government, right? More laws, et cetera. I don't want us to have to go that route. But I think the DEP is backing people into a corner now, and those things need to be looked at. But even still, there are some things that can, and I think will be done in this area. For example, Assemblywoman Andrea Katz proposed some legislation about trying to do some cost sharing, right? So that municipal police could help the state park police, police Wharton State Forest, right? So it wasn't just limited to the state park police with the limited numbers of folks that they have, right? So there's out of the box ideas, from that perspective that could be looked at. I think what could happen, right, is that the legislature could look at this and say, hey, look, we're trying to work with the DEP. We've been trying to come to some sort of compromise position. You guys aren't there with us now, so now we're going to pass a law that says, hey, you've got to create a map for Wharton State Forest, but it's got to be ratified by the districts that state forest covers, right? In which case, if we did that, we know that the Pinelands districts are very much in support of access, right? And so those, I think, legislators would be, very motivated to make sure that whatever map they ratified or passed, would support their constituents' needs, right? So, those are just some ideas, that I think, could be looked at, right, to try to solve this issue. Like I said at the start, though, I don't want that, right? I don't want to pass laws for this. I'd rather come up with some sort of compromise position, with the DEP that's somewhere in the middle, right? Not just the DEP taken, and we're just giving,
So now, for this map has already been implemented? Did that require the Pinelands Commission to vote for it at all, or no?
No, it did not.
So
presented to the Pinelands Commission.
Say that again.
I don't think it was even presented to the Pinelands Commission. I could be wrong, but I don't think it was.
Got you. So beyond that, in terms of certainly, especially with sportsmen and the advocates, and it's funny just getting your guys' list of everybody who uses the fort. You think of hikers, bikers, hunters, but then just the scenic drivers. I'm like, I've never thought of that. But yeah, people go to drive, and especially during COVID when you're stuck in the house, go around and drive and get outside. But Ron, in terms of kind of let's play this out. This is in 6 months from now. This is still in effect. There's issues with it. Where do you see kind of the wheels falling off? Is it just that enforcement's going to be such a mess that I think folks will realize this is just an impractical map? Is it, hey, this is going to cause, I see folks in the chat that it's going to cause logistical issues for commuting to work? Is it going to be, there's going to be so many complaints that the backlash is going to be worse than the please don't do this? Where do you kind of see this a couple months from now? Is it, we stuck with it, or is it going to be, hey, we have buyer's remorse here?
Yeah, I think that ultimately the users, right, are going to be negatively impacted, and yet the bad actor activity, right? There's nothing within this plan here that is going to address what the cause of any kind of damage that's going on right now. So ultimately, it's a very good question you asked, Mike, because I have really labored over this throughout the years as far as what the actual real end game is. Like, why take this approach? It's a very good question. I don't know if any of us have that actual answer, but there certainly doesn't seem, certainly doesn't seem like the means to justify the end, right? Like, the approach here. So a lot of folks, myself included, suspect that there's more at play here that we just don't exactly know about. But I think there's more deeper, right? That's not on the surface, that we just don't have the liberty or transparency or knowledge to understand this approach. But ultimately it's going to impact the user groups, right? Like, everyone's going to be, nobody's happy with this plan, other than a minority of folks, right, that would support just preservation. All right, so again, you're going into philosophy. You got conservation versus preservation. So you really have those philosophies sort of opposed right here.
Now, you had said kind of other things at play. Have you heard, and I'm not trying to start a rumor or anything, have you heard they're looking to close more roads, or what do you think that kind of the next step is?
I have not.
Okay.
I've not heard expanding there. The verbiage, right, has always been, that they would ultimately be with full impunity, right, to be able to make a decision, based on your environmentally sensitive factors and so forth, right? So they're the you mentioned balls and strikes earlier, right? They're the umpires, right? So they get to choose, the action that's taken, and there's no real checks and balance, right? There's no real check and balance, right? Other than folks just being very upset with what's going on and voicing their opposition to it.
And Mike,
John,
I
has
just
there
want to
been
add on
any?
one
Oh,
thing
go ahead, John, please.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add on
Please.
one thing to your question earlier about what happens next, right? I think one of the things that we got to think about, right, is that we are entering an election year for the governor, right? And this is not a partisan issue at all, right? There are supporters on both sides of the aisle, for this issue. And I can tell you, for Open Trails, I mean, we want to try to educate the public on, where people, specifically candidates, stand on these positions, right? So one of the things we're going to be doing is sending a letter out to all of the candidates for governor, Republican and Democrat, and others, Libertarian, et cetera, right, and saying where do you stand on this topic, right? And our intent is to then publish those positions, right, those responses to people, so that when we get into to the election, people can make a decision, based on that information, right? Because the DEP is directed by the governor's office, right? So that governor's office is who fills that governor's office, and what their position is on this matter is important.
Well, certainly, as we wrap up here, and certainly any last minute questions, folks, please put them in the chat for our group here. Yeah, clearly, look, knowing where everybody stands is important. And my hope would be, again, we're not looking to taking out beating up on the DEP. My hope is folks from the DP watch this, and I'd love to talk to them about this stuff, and hopefully they'll re-engage with you guys. It would be my hope, right? I mean, I don't know, have you guys had subsequent conversation? I know, John, you had told me that right before it was announced, I think you had a very brief conversation. But have there been any conversations, either one of you? Have they reached out since, or it's just been radio silence?
So we had a meeting with Waterford and Senator Moriarty's office right before the map dropped. In fact, they literally released it, I think, as we were walking out the door of that meeting. And I'll give them credit. I mean, they have talked to us regularly, over the last 10 years, right? But as far as I'm concerned, talk is cheap, right? We have asked multiple times what we can do to help, how we can do volunteer efforts. How can we work on compromising issues? We talked about documenting roads for them. All of these things, right? And they've talked to us, but there hasn't been any real action. No compromise, right? I'm not expecting them to say, "Hey, you got to come to my side, and it's my way or the highway." Let's compromise, right? Let's find some sort of middle ground that more people can agree to on this topic.
Yeah, and again, I think just as we wrap up here, clearly I think it shows that we had a reasonable, thoughtful, intelligent conversation. We don't want to tear down Wharton and put Amazon warehouses there. We don't want to tear up but that's the thing, right? Right? If you say anything that isn't total preservation, it's, well, you hate the environment, you're a climate change denier, you want to tear all the trees down. No, all right, stop. Let's get back to a sense of normalcy here. We can be more nuanced with it. I think John earlier said nuance. And I think that's where we're at. I mean, my hope is DEP is going to see this. All right, let's reconsider this. Let's get everybody in a room. You still may not like all the closures that we're going to do, but we're not going to be as draconian with it. Just some sort of hey, let's kind of come to our senses here and have a compromise is, I think, everybody's goal. So as we wrap up here, John, talk to us just about Open Trails New Jersey. How can folks get involved, learn more? How can they follow you guys and all the great work you're doing?
Yeah, thanks. So opentrailsnj.org is our website. We're also really active on probably more active on our Facebook page. You can join us. You can follow us. You don't need to be a member We try to keep people informed on what's going on in the state forest and what actions the state is taking or not taking, things that we support and don't support, and we try to take our cue from the users, right? What do they want? So if you're not following us already, come check us out. Take a look at what we published and what we say, and we also don't ban anybody who disagrees, right? So if you disagree with us, by all means, come on and tell us you disagree, and we'll have a healthy conversation about that.
Before we hear from Ron, Jay had a question on YouTube. What more can we do to push back and actually get our voices heard? Any other final thoughts from you guys regarding that? Any advocacy? Any either social media, writing letters to electeds? Anything else we can think of?
Yeah, so I'll say if you go to our Facebook page right now, we're having a campaign right now to call Governor Murphy, and send him emails, about this topic. I've said before, I think our legislators, especially in the Pinelands districts, are already on our side on this topic, but it would not hurt at all to pick up the phone and call them and let them know that you support them supporting us, right? Make them aware, right? Because I said I don't want to wind up in a legislative, solution for this, but that might be where we need to go. And if that's the case, then we need that support from our legislators. So, let them know if you hear them supporting us, thank them for their support. Tell them you want them to do more, and you want them to help us with this issue.
Amen to that. Well, Ron, talk to us about anybody wants to get involved with their county chapter, the New Jersey State Federation of Sportsmen Clubs. I know you're a member of Camden County, vice president. I just saw in Atlantic County they meet at the Germania Gunning Club, which is not very far from my house. So, talk to us about just your organization, how folks can follow you guys, and how they can get involved and become members.
Certainly. It would also there's a website. So if you look up, I believe it is that I'd have to look again. I'll be on the spot here. But anyway, if you go on the web and you go NJSFSC, you'll be able to learn about the organization. We help to preserve and promote the tradition of hunting and fishing, trapping, and very, very strong organization with representation in all the counties of New Jersey, and encourage you to check us out.
Well, Ron and John this is a lovely conversation, very thought-provoking. Really appreciate you guys participating. Appreciate everybody watching. Again, SouthJerseyForward.org. We look forward to exploring this issue and a whole host of other issues further, whether it be food insecurity, housing, enjoying our environment. There's a whole lot of problems. Like Jay-Z said, 99 problems, but we're going to hopefully have 99 solutions. So, John and Ron, really appreciate all of your